sure I hit record for those who are unable to make it. But thanks again for joining our session on applying the WHO's workplace mental health guidelines, again, in celebration for a Safe and Sound Week for 2023. This is a focus time for OSHA on looking at the occupational health and safety of our employees, which includes not just the physical health and safety, but also the psychological health and safety of our employees. Now, recognizing that that's a relatively new concept in many cases, this will give you a good primer on how to get started and understanding how the WHO and the International Labor Organization have positioned addressing workplace mental health. So why would I be interested in talking about this? Well, I own a company called Verdant Consulting. We focus on workplace mental health. I'm also the global liaison for ISO for psychological health and safety, bridging between HR standards and our health and safety standards. So I spend a lot of time and energy in this area. We also certify companies as being psychologically safe by implementing these global standards. So we have a lot of interest and passion around this topic. We also have affiliates from around the globe. These are just a few of them that come from a wide variety of industries. They all have very different approaches and skill sets and varied backgrounds. So it's a global consortium of a team that's focused on helping organizations implement and create safe and sound workplaces. So let's get started with our first opportunity for people to join in the chat. What % of employees have mental health? And this is our first question. You're going to have several opportunities to engage today. So this is only our first one. So yeah, what % of employees have mental health? Okay, we have some sharp-witted people here. Yes, it is 100%. Often when we think about workplace mental health, we think about workplace and its impact and cause of mental illness or other ailments or hazards. So when we say mental health, we are addressing mental health in the same way that we address the physical health and safety of our employees. So just like we would have for those of us who work in person, regular fire drills, or look at the ergonomic positioning of people to not have repetitive injury. We need to look at and can look at with these guidelines the psychological health and safety hazards that can impact the mental health of our employees. So we want our employees to be healthy and safe at work, safe and sound at work. And so we have both physical and mental health.
In some point of the history of labor, of industry.
I'm going to hit pause really quickly. If you can hear him, or yes, if you can hear him, will someone put an exclamation point in the chat for me? I always like to make sure that we don't have a problem. And okay, thank you, Shakira. Appreciate that. Let's go ahead and continue to listen to Claudio.
We forgot that there are human beings working at the factories. We forgot, I don't know why, because maybe we need to be very productive back then, and we treat us like machines, and still we do. So I think that this challenge that we have right now is to humanize the industry, to bring back that aware that we are human beings, that we have feelings, we have emotions, we have all this, and obviously we can create something different.
And so I'm with Claudio about creating something different and understanding we have human beings at work, not machines. We know that we are feeling creatures who also think. And so operating as if we don't have those emotions really puts us at a disadvantage when it comes to our workplaces and our businesses. And there's tons of data on the negative impact of ignoring that fact, but also the positive impact and ability to address risk and the hazards that can exist in the workplace. Just like we would with physical health and safety for our workers. So what we're going to be covering is information from the WHO as well as a few other resources and research that talks about how workplace has an impact on the mental health of our employees, and the impact that that can have on our businesses, including 12 billion working days being lost globally due to poor mental health. I don't actually have a slide on this, but let me give you one more data point real quickly. This will be an opportunity in the chat. If I were to say that your mental health was impacted by your direct supervisor, would that be the same amount as your therapist, your doctor, or your spouse? Go ahead and put your guess in the chat. So my direct supervisor has the same impact on my mental health as my therapist, my medical doctor, or my spouse. Go ahead and put your guesses in the chat. One of those three. Which one? Therapist? Karina says therapist. Therapist? Your boss? Yes, your boss has the same impact as your therapist, your medical doctor, or your spouse. Any other guesses? Emily says spouse. We got therapist. All okay. Actually, and I don't have a chart on this. If you want one, please feel free to reach out to me. I can send you the chart. But the research shows that your direct manager has the same impact on your mental health as your spouse. And that's about 69% impact on your mental health. Our medical doctors are about 50%, and our therapists are about, I think, 39 to 40%. So our spouses and our direct managers have the same level of impact and the highest impact on our personal mental health. And if we think about it, that makes sense. We spend a large percent of our time working, and our direct supervisor or manager can have a huge impact on our livelihood, our sense of self-worth, etc. So yeah, there's a big impact that happens at work on our mental health. So WHO has looked at this. They published their guidelines, which I'll talk about in a minute, back in September of 2022. Yes, absolutely, Trupti. I will actually send you all the recording so that you can have it. And then if there's anything else you need, anything else I mentioned, please feel free to reach out to me. And I'll share my email in the chat in a second. Yes, you're welcome. So workplace mental health policy and programs is really not considered to be to address issues, but more proactively create a healthy and thriving workplace, which helps contribute to not just the company, but also the community at large, as I'm sure we can all imagine. So in their World Health Organization global guidelines, they identify that meaningful work is protective for mental health. Let me give you another little tidbit here. So everybody's heard of burnout. Yes, if you've heard of burnout, put a exclamation point for me in the chat if you've heard of burnout. See who's paying attention. Yes, okay, expected that. Now, put a pound sign or a hashtag, if you're younger, in the chat if you've heard of bore out. Okay, yes, Ty, I can imagine that you've heard of bore out. So bore out is the opposite of burnout. It is when we do not have enough meaningful work to do, and research shows it actually has is more harmful to our mental health than burnout. So meaningful work, doing work and being productive is considered to be protective for our mental health because we feel valued, we have a sense of worth. We also have the financial stability to support ourselves and our lives in the current economy and society. In addition, poor working conditions can deteriorate our mental health. So going back to the group, how does a poor working condition impact our overall mental health? Go ahead and share your thoughts in the chat. Being treated unfairly. Yep. Stress. Thank you, Deborah. What are some other ways that poor working conditions can deteriorate our mental health? Yes, health problems, exactly. Not given the tools to do the job. So true, Ty. Not having the resources and tools. We're actually going to talk about that. Yes, Janelle, conflict between workers, conflict between the managers and employees. Excessive workload is a huge one. So thank you, Karina. Misunderstandings. Yes, absolutely. So we know intellectually that poor working conditions can deteriorate our mental health, but often from an organizational perspective, we don't address that until people are in crisis. So just to share a few more data points with you, if you haven't picked up on it already, I am a data nerd. But here's one that I think really is poignant. This research showed that this percent of employees, and you'll have a chance to guess what percent here in a second, this percent of employees say they have no reason to say something when they see something wrong at work. Not the same group, but same study also showed that they see no reason to say something when they have an idea that would benefit the company. So this percent of employees basically stay silent if they see something wrong or they see an opportunity to be better. What percent of employees do you think that is? Go ahead and put your guesses in the chat. %60%. We have a 60%. Thank you, Shakira. 75, 70. 80. Yep. My experience, 90, right? So those are some high numbers for us to think just kind of that's just natural. Think about the world of work. If we could unmute those employees. So 70%, according to McKinsey, of employees will not speak up if they see something wrong. Think about the downstream impact that has on our business. Quality, performance, customer service, and in some case, tragedy. The research done around the Boeing crashes that they had showed that employees had seen the issues, but not felt comfortable raising the issues. And when they did, they didn't feel like anyone listened. And that resulted in several tragedies, right? And this has come up in a lot of research when we do root cause analysis. People knew, but they didn't feel comfortable speaking up. Psychologically safe workplaces have higher performance, stronger learning behaviors, better innovation. The list goes on and on. But it also, when we have low psychological health and safety, it actually increases injuries at work. So skipping breaks can cause people to burn out or have less time to recover, both physically or emotionally. If I'm doing physical labor and I'm hurrying through work to speed through it because of my workload's too high, etc., that's added strain on the body, but also added strain on the mind. The big one is being afraid to ask for help, which can have heightened exposure to injury, but also to detriment to our financial stability. And I thought this was really interesting. So last year, the average number of sick days was the highest cause was due to mental health, not being sick, not having a musculoskeletal injury, not being injured in some other capacity, mental health. So we're already seeing a negative impact on our businesses in general.
Many countries around the world have standards and laws relative to how you ensure the psychological and psychosocial safety of employees at work. It's a requirement. We don't have that here. It is still legal to bully people here. It is still legal to mistreat people as long as you don't do it to the wrong person who's involved in protected class activity or in a protected class himself. So our systems are insufficient. And on top of that, we have a kind of an individualistic type of culture that doesn't seem to understand that. And I'm an individualist as well. I really believe in self-sufficiency. There's a lot of things I can do on my own. The challenge is I limit what I can do if it's only on my own. I feel like I'm very smart. I feel like I'm very capable, blah, blah, blah. But there are some things I have to have other people. I can't build roads by myself. I can't ensure that my air is clean by myself. I'm not my own military. So we need other people for lots of things. And I think sometimes we have these binary choice type perspectives or zero sum focuses, I have this zero sum game focus that suggests that it has to be this or that. I believe it has to be this and that. I believe that we should have an environment that is physically safe for me, but is also psychologically safe for me.
So speaking of those other parts of the world that have guidelines, in 2007, both Canada and Australia published their national requirements for having psychologically healthy and safe workplaces. You can see this kind of poignant campaign they did about 5 or 6, 7 years ago, looking at the physical injury that can happen when I'm afraid to ask for help, when I'm afraid to look stupid. And so they've invested in this work and have it a requirement within their national guidelines. For us here in the US, to the north and the south of us, both Mexico and Canada have requirements for addressing psychosocial risk and psychosocial hazards. No, it has not expired. Those are the national requirements and laws within those countries. And this continues to grow. And so this is something that globally, and as you'll see from the WHO, it's a mindset shift of we need our employees to be healthy and safe, and that includes mental health as well. So ISO, which is the International Organization for Standardization, many of us know that for like standardization around, clean water. They originally were created during World War II when we were sharing equipment with our allies, but we needed standardization to make sure that it worked together. But they did do a lot of things around supply chain and total quality management. In the 80s, they published a standard around occupational health and safety. That occupational health and safety had both physical health and safety and psychological health and safety. But it wasn't until 2021 that they actually published this ISO 45003, which are the global guidelines for managing psychosocial risks and hazards. That addresses the psychological health and safety. We're going to talk about that within the context of the WHO guidelines as well. So that gives us a framework for addressing all of the things we've been talking about so far, identifying the hazards, understanding the impact that has on the business, and then addressing those and minimizing those hazards as much as possible. Again, same as physical health and safety. Back in October of 2022, our own Surgeon General published their guidelines and framework for workplace mental health and well-being. So you can see there's starting to be a little traction here in the US, similar to Australia, Canada, and other parts of the world, where this is going to be less of a request and potentially will become more of a requirement for organizations. One of the data points I showed earlier was that 81% of employees will leave their company for one with better mental health support. So our employees are already speaking with their feet. And if retention of top talent is a critical business priority, which it should be, this is a way to help retain your top talent, is by addressing not just crisis support, but how do we create a healthy and thriving workplace?
I'll say, and particularly in the US, there tends to be a perception that people having mental issues are just crazy, right? They're just wackos, if you want to call it that. But over the past, 50 to 100 years, the science of psychology and psychiatry has proved differently, right? That mental issues and mental illness is just that. It is an illness. And therefore it's also preventable. And being that most of us spend a large part of our life and time working and in workplaces and working around others that are not family per se, the impacts of our interactions can have mental impacts, mental risks and mental consequences, as well as our normal, what we think of physical consequences when we're talking about occupational health and safety. So this is an occupational health issue.
So Ken is on the ISO technical committee for occupational health and safety. I am the global liaison for occupational health and safety and human capital, human resources. So, but Ken was the lead in developing that global standard around psychological health and safety. And this was him talking to the American Society for Safety Professionals about the publication of that guideline. But we're here today to talk about the WHO's guidelines, which just came out in September of last year. So they're not even a year old. And I'm not going to go through everything in here, but I am going to give you their main 3 areas to focus so that you can get some context about how might we as an organization, or how might I start talking about this within my organization, so that we can also start making this investment and understanding and retaining our top talent and creating healthy workplaces. So the 3 areas of focus in the WHO are around prevention, protection, promotion, and support. So we're going to talk about each of those 3 areas. But before I do, I want to open up and see if there's any questions so far. So far we've covered, why this is important, what's happening globally, and now we're going to go into the specifics within the WHO. But just in case there's any questions, let me open that up. If you have anything, please pop a question in the chat. If you don't have a question, go ahead and give me a smiley face or some kind of emoticon, just so I know everyone's still there. Thank you, Deborah. All right, awesome. Thank you. Perfect. Okay. If nothing else, I got to see smiley faces, so that works for me. So we're going to talk about prevention, protection, promotion, and support in more detail. So the prevention piece definitely gives you an opportunity to apply the thank you, Trupti. Yeah, well, good. The good thing is with comprehending all this information is we're recording it and you can watch it later if you'd like. But yeah, so the prevention piece really is a great way for you to implement those ISO global guidelines and standards because that's where we want to identify those what are called psychosocial hazards and risks to our mental health. So let's go through that one first, because it's a great place to start in understanding how are we doing as an organization in impacting our employees and their mental health. All right, so here's yet another opportunity for us to interact together. So I'm going to do a quick check-in. So grab a piece of paper and a pen, or a calculator, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to go through, I think it's like 12 questions. So you can do a check-in on how your organization is doing, or how you're doing specifically around some of these key areas. Okay, and then I'll go over, you don't have to share, so please be as honest as possible, brutally so that you can get a good context of how are we doing within this space. All right, so first question, I can be myself without fear of judgment. So if you feel like you can be yourself without fear of judgment, go ahead and give that a 5. If you never feel like you can be yourself without fear of judgment, this is all at work, by the way, this is all at work, then that's a 1, and then somewhere in between. So we're going to add all these up as we go, and at the end, again, I'll give you I'll talk about how the scores map to psychological safety. So I can be myself without fear of judgment. 5 for very often, 1 for never. I'm encouraged and supported to take calculated risks in my decision-making and problem-solving processes. So I'm encouraged and supported to take calculated risks. 5 for very often, 1 for never, or somewhere in between. I feel safe to express disagreements or challenge ideas. Again, 5 for very often, 1 for never, or somewhere in between. I can express my true thoughts and opinions. I know what I'm expected to do in my job. I confidently raise problems or concerns, knowing they'll be met with curiosity in an effort to find solutions. I feel comfortable asking questions to seek clarification, gather information, or challenge assumptions. So I feel comfortable asking questions. Again, 5 for very often, 1 for never, or somewhere in between. I feel supported in learning from mistakes and seeing them as opportunities for growth. I'm encouraged to explore innovative ideas and experiment with new approaches. I believe that conflicts will be addressed constructively and resolved in a fair and respectful manner. I feel there is a culture of trust and mutual support. I feel that my voice and contributions are valued and actively sought out. All right, add them up, and you can see where you fall. This is really about the psychological safety component of what we're talking about. There are also the hazards, which we're going to review, but psychological safety and behaviors, that's the outcome. That tells us we are in a good place where culturally we have a healthy and thriving organization. If you had anything with the 1, pay attention to that. That might be something you want to do something about. If you feel comfortable sharing your score in the chat, please do so. Do not feel obligated to do that, but it's always nice to see kind of where people land. 25. Shakira, you are in the right place, my friend. You are in the right place. So these are opportunities for us to 33. Yep. Also. So, even if we have strong or high psychological safety, maintaining that, if we're just kind of accidentally finding ourselves there, maintaining that is critical, especially as we grow, evolve, new people come and go, because that changes the dynamic of the organization. And so even if you have a high score, these are critical pieces to pay attention to so that you can maintain that high score. Okay, so, and I know that you can see this bar on here and I don't know how to turn that off, but, so psychosocial hazards to mental health, there are about 12 to 13, depending on which one you look at. I can't keep track of that many things, so I organize them under this structure of what I call C, and that's structure and systems, external and environmental factors, and then expectations of behavior. So we're going to talk about them in these buckets, just as a way for us to kind of keep things organized. But you can, when you go and look at these in the ISO standard or the WHO, they aren't organized in this way, just as an FYI. Okay, so these are the structures and systems, the ways in which we work that can have a negative impact on the mental health of our workplace. Things like role clarity, workload, I think somebody mentioned that earlier, opportunity for career growth, level of control and autonomy that I have as an adult working in the workforce. These are all things that without them, it can negatively impact our mental health. So again, none of this is about feelings. All of this is about how we work, our ways of working, and can be addressed and identified and mitigated, right? So one of the ones that recently came up, I was working with a manufacturing company, and workload came up high. That was the highest hazard area. Everything else was kind of in the same bucket, but workload was high. So we really double clicked on that and went and looked at what was causing that. And it wasn't workload, it was prioritization. And how do we prioritize and reprioritize in a more nimble way, as opposed to everything just feeling like an ad? And so with that insight, they were able to come up with better processes for regularly meeting and reviewing the priorities to make sure that scope creep and other add-ons didn't just kind of get lumped on top of the workload, which can help us with having a more productive and thriving workplace. All right, next one is an external environment or environment. I think about these as the non-controllables. So this is kind of where we work, right? So the other one was how our ways of working. This is where we work. So whether it's the physical environment where I work, do I work in places with extreme temperature, where I have extreme noise? Am I working very long shifts, overnight shifts? Those are things that we can't necessarily not do, but we need to be aware. Okay, that doesn't mean we ignore them, right? We need to be aware of the mental health impact that can have on our employees, and then try to mitigate that as much as possible. Things like more frequent breaks, or giving people resources around how do I work in these environments. This includes also working in highly emotionally charged workplaces, emergency services, healthcare, any place where I can experience either direct trauma or vicarious trauma. Again, we don't just ignore it. Well, that's part of the job. We need to build in processes to help protect the mental health of employees. Think about it as the mental health PPE that we can help equip our employees with. The other thing that's outside of our control are things like the dependency of our supply chain, our clients. Are we working with angry customers all of the time? Are there conflicts with my work and life? Part of the environment that's changed for many workers is working from home. Again, we understand that can have an impact on our mental health, but what do we do about it? So exploring all of those things that, again, we can't make that go away, but what we can do is be aware of it and put in mitigations to protect ourselves, right? And to help protect our employees. One that comes up a lot is the Zoom fatigue. When I work with a lot of 100% remote companies, and what we put in place for them when this comes up as an area of concern is that they have a standard meeting set that's only 50 minutes instead of 60, so that everybody gets that 10-minute break in between to just do the basics, as well as just shut it down for a minute or two. And so there are just some things you can put in place, relatively simple, if this is an area of concern. But these are known hazards that aren't controlled by the company, but definitely impact them. Last one here would be something like outside influences that could impact the mental health of our employees unrelated to work. Things like social unrest, the economy, working in a war zone. That might have nothing to do with the workplace, but as humans, we have the one brain. And so if I'm stressed because of things outside of work, it is going to show up at work. We know this. So how do we, again, raise our awareness about these things and create mitigations and put processes in place that can help diminish the impact it has on our workforce? Last but not least are our expectations of behavior. Now, often when you think of psychological health and safety, you just think of these things, right? We think about how we show up at work, our behaviors, our human-to-human interaction. But as you saw, there's a ton of other things we should also look at within that context of the workplace and the impact on our employees' mental health. So there's individual expectations of behavior, of how we work together as how I show up as an individual, my own personal biases, both of others and myself. There's also very specific psychosocial hazards for leading other people. In fact, being responsible for other people is identified as a hazard for our mental health, because there are specific stressors that come up for us as leaders that in many cases we never talk about. And they've been well documented for decades, but we don't equip leaders on how to navigate that. Then there's teamwork. How do we work together? How do we win together? How do we create thriving cultures that can pull together and work toward common goals? So often you'll hear psychological safety. This is where psychological safety shows up. The things that we assessed earlier, that's about the output, that's the behavior, that's the outcome of addressing all three of these areas and these psychosocial hazards. Any questions so far on any of these areas, either the structures and systems, our external environmental workspaces, or our expectations of behavior? If you don't have a question, go ahead and give me a thumbs up emoji if you can find it, or reaction. That's good too. Gotta find the thumbs up. Oh, there we go. Like that guy. Oh, a party. Love it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. Open for a second. Okay, so these are the hazards that the World Health Organization wants us to focus on as prevention, right? Addressing, that's the first step, that's the foundation. Because if we do all these other things, but we don't address any of the dysfunction that can happen in some of those places, or the impact from an environmental perspective, then we really aren't building a strong enough foundation that's going to be able to be maintained. But what's interesting is in the research, because they show you percent of confidence in the investment and the ROI, the one with the highest amount of ROI, the one area that they say has the highest correlation to improve outcomes is actually this second one, which is about training and equipping our teams on how do they maintain their own mental health and the mental health of others at work. So, for example, training people on how to respond when they feel challenged, overcome overwhelm, understand their stress responses. There's no other place where we really are taught that, right? But those are basic humaning skills, ways in which we interact with each other that without them, we can create conflict. Often when we do like team effectiveness training, things like that, we don't talk about the inside of the person and how we are psychologically built as human beings. Now, this isn't everybody just sharing their childhood trauma. This is about building skills and capabilities to be able to recognize challenges, understand how we respond, and build competencies for how to navigate those in a more healthy way. I mentioned leaders, manager training, again, highest correlation to outcomes. Because why do you think that would be? Actually, I'm not going to give you the answer on that one in the chat. Why do you think investing in leader resiliency and capabilities around creating psychologically healthy and safe workplaces, why would that have the highest correlation to outcome? Go ahead and put your thoughts in the chat. Why is that a good investment? Yes, Emily has been paying attention. Your boss affects you like a spouse, right? So being miserable tanks productivity. So good, Emily. Thank you very much. And our leaders, right? How many, I mean, you don't have to answer this question more in general, but we don't teach leaders about the emotional weight of being responsible for other people. So helping leaders understand how to navigate their own needs helps them be better leaders. And kind of gets that out of the way. So having leaders who can navigate things, challenges in a more effective way has a huge benefit to our businesses. And then finally, organizational resiliency. So educating and identifying and educating people on those psychosocial hazards and how do we address them, understanding what those are and how do we keep an eye out for them and how do we mitigate their impact. Again, this is a skill set, this is a competency that we can build, and that's a way in which we protect and promote. Often you'll hear people talk about something called mental health first aid, things like that. Mental health first aid is really less about protect and promote and more about support. So a mental health first aid is in many ways like we would teach CPR. Think about it in that way. So mental health first aid, or there's another model called QPR, which is like CPR. So that mental health first aid is more of, I am knowledgeable enough to know when I see someone who may be experiencing a crisis, and I'm equipped to keep them safe until authorities or other resources are available to help them survive. So that's where mental health first aid would come in. So that's more, again, on this crisis side. Everything else we've been talking about is more on the proactive general population. So when we look at the WHO, they have specific pieces under the support section. So having interventions for people, specific ones for people in health, humanitarian or emergency workers. As I mentioned, we have those high-risk workspaces that we need to pay attention to. They also talk about individual interventions for workers with emotional distress. That would be things like your EAP or mental health services through your health insurance, and then building in a return to work program for people who've been out on leave due to mental health, and then helping gain employment for people living with a mental health condition. So these are more on the support side, and in addressing those specific needs. Okay, so we've talked about the initial number one, which was we want to get the foundation going and identify psychosocial hazards. Then we want to make sure at the same time, not necessarily in order, we want to address skill sets and competencies and understanding how we navigate challenges in more effective and productive ways, and then supporting people during crisis and in need. So here are some common questions, concerns, fears that come up that I want to address. So one is this reticence to even talk about these topics, because there's a concern that if we reach out to a struggling employee, now it's either a HIPAA violation, we've crossed some line, or I have to somehow fix it, right? And I have to be a mental health professional. That is not the case. So if you establish a caring culture, then and we feel more knowledgeable about understanding our own mental health and how mental health actually, just as a science, right? How do we keep healthy and safe? And those leaders model that self-care, then and we address those psychosocial hazards, then reaching out to someone is just part of how we work, right? Hey, are you okay? Is a fine question. It's what we're afraid of what the answer will be. And so when we equip leaders on what to do if that answer is something that is more intimidating to them, which isn't for them to fix it, very much so, not for them to fix it. It's for them to know what services that people can take advantage of, or to use it as an opportunity to learn, how can I continue to make our team better? How do we deal with concerns of privacy or retaliation? Again, this is a topic that we haven't been comfortable talking about. We haven't been comfortable talking about the mental health of everyone, that we all have mental health. So if we talk about that, we think about it in the same way. We have no problem doing sleep challenges, water challenges, step challenges. That 20 years ago was very private. We never would have had those conversations. So we are changing our mindset around our health being holistic. And when we can maintain a caring culture that makes it safe to talk about those things by respecting confidentiality, making sure that our leaders are equipped on creating connection with their teams, making sure that we swiftly address toxic behaviors, and that we monitor those hazards, then we make it a more productive place where we can have these discussions. This comes up a lot. What if the employee is performing poorly and we need to impose disciplinary action, and they say, well, I've been highly stressed, overworked, etc., and I need to take care of my mental health. We do that the same way we would address if somebody had a broken arm, right? If someone had a broken arm, I wouldn't think that they broke their arm in order to avoid work. Gosh, I hope not. I also wouldn't try to fix their broken arm. I would have them go to health professionals to get that fixed. So what we want to think about this is compassionate accountability. So if we've done all the work of creating a culture of compassion, of courage, then we are better able to address these accountability head on, because we've shown that we're committed to a human-centered workplace. So, stating the essential functions of the job, having it be a co-creation of what will work to meet the needs of the business, making reasonable accommodations. This isn't about we have to take people's work away. If this is the workload and it's reasonable, then this is the job, right? And so we can have that conversation in a very compassionate way. I get this one a lot. We're so busy. This seems like a nice to have. Boy, I could show you the data that tells you the opposite. Just look at the absentee numbers, right? 18.5 average days lost for mental health. Okay. It's too expensive not to address this issue. And a stitch in time saves 9. So think about it this way. If you're only concerned about people in crisis, on average, it takes someone to, and depending on their culture, their background, their gender, it takes on average 7 to 8 or longer years to seek help. That means we have people who are struggling, but they're in role and they're not, they really don't see themselves as falling on that side of the continuum. So there's ways we need to think about this as a strategic investment in the health of our organization. It's addressing risk. It's addressing the impact on customer service, quality, the list goes on and on.
There are all of these things which have brought us to a situation which is completely unsustainable. And what I think is that we are at the threshold of a really massive shift in, it's almost like an industrial revolution. For me, that we have to take psychosocial well-being seriously.
So Susanna was actually involved with the WHO, the creation of these global standards. So I wanted to close with her statement about having to take this seriously. So for a long time, we felt like we can just ignore the mental health of our employees, and that by squeezing the most out of people and saying, leave this at the door, leave your emotions at the door, or it's business, it's not personal. That's not real. We know how humans are. We know how we evolved for 200,000 years, and we have feelings, and those feelings are the same whether we're at work or not. And as you saw, are highly impacted by both our home life with our partners as well as our work life. And so ignoring that impact, it just diminishes the productivity and the impact of our workforce. So just to kind of get you started, this gives you a good primer on the WHO's guidelines for workplace mental health. Hopefully you have a sense of, okay, I understand those 3 areas and where we need to get started. Then here's what the UN recommends. Number 1, raise awareness. Make it so that everyone knows that we all have mental health, right? That we can all get that first question right. So many times people think of mental health as something for other people, people who are struggling, people who can't get it together. It is not. It is for all of us. Identify those hazards and risks, right? Those are very clearly in the guidelines. The guidelines are out there and they are free. So, feel free to go out there and find those. Establish new routines and habits, not just for the workplace, but for yourselves. Make sure that you're also taking care of you. And as I said, the highest correlation to outcomes has been connected with equipping our leaders with the skills and capabilities that they need to navigate challenges and help lead their teams. So that's a great place to start. And that is my time. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can follow me on TikTok or just send me a note. I'll put my email in the chat. If you want a copy of the recording, I'll probably send it to you anyway. But if there's any other data that you're looking for, please feel free to just reach out to me directly. Always happy to share, and I love making new friends. With that, any questions or comments? All right. how to address, Trupti, can you come in? Thank you, Karina. Thank you, Shakira. How to address, Trupti, I'm not sure I followed the question, but more. Okay, well, if you're responsible for health and safety in your organization, if you're responsible for leadership development, if you're responsible for diversity, equity, or inclusion, or if you're just a responsible person, highly recommend that you share some of these resources with the powers that be, because addressing the human side of work helps work be better and helps people thrive and do their best work. All right, with that, thank you so much for taking the time with me today. And I hope that you at least took away one tip, one area that you can apply back in at your work. So thank you so much. Everybody take care. Bye.